Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is a follow-up from the special meeting on August 15th, 2023, where presentation was made about the actual results and cash flows in the electric department. At that time, we brought in GHJ advisors to conduct a forensic investigation on the cash and some areas of concern brought forth by council. And council, in the course of the closed session items, has directed staff to have them present an open session report. So I'll bring up Peter Brown and Christina Fung. Unfortunately, the monitors aren't working, so their report will be verbal only.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council. My name is Peter Brown. I am with the accounting firm of Greenhouse & Jenks, located in Southern California, as Mr. Bogart has referenced. We were engaged back in August of this year to assist the city with an internal investigation involving its electrical department. And I want to start by laying a little bit of foundation as to what we did and what we didn't do. If you look at a business, and a business of the electrical department is owned by the city, there's the front office, I'd say, and then there's the back office. The front office is everything that the electrical department does to keep the lights turned on, to keep the AC running in the summer, to keep everybody safe in the city, all the technical requirements to go into that, all the operational requirements to go into that. That was not what we were asked to do. We were asked to look really at the back office operations and look at the fiscal management of the electric utility, look at rates, and look at some of the capital projects that they have been involved with. As you all know, the director of the electrical utility, Tom Miller, was put on administrative leave back on July 31st of 2023. At that point, we were asked to come in and assist with the internal investigation. Mr. Miller was put on leave as a result of some initial investigative work that was done by the city's Finance and Administration Department. And at that time, the Finance and Administration Department determined that there was a negative cash balance in the electric utility of approximately $9 million. And the question became, what happened? How did that happen? And understanding all the facts around that. Now, we should probably back up a little bit and say, what is a $9 million negative cash balance? Because most people here would say there's no such thing as negative cash. But essentially what happens is a lot of the funds, the cash of the city, is aggregated into one bank account. And so you have various funds within the city, and one of those funds is the capital projects fund, for instance, of the electrical utility. They can actually write checks for amounts that they don't actually have in their fund, and those checks will be cash because there is cash in the bank account of the city. And so that's what happened, and it happened to the tune of about $9 million. So the question becomes, why did it happen? How did it happen? So I'm going to go through that today. But let me start by just going over some of the procedures that we performed. We met with a lot of people. We met with, obviously, members of the city council. We met with city manager. We met with many of the folks in the finance department. We also met with folks of the electrical utility. And we met on several occasions with Mr. Miller. And I would have to say that Mr. Miller was very, very responsive, very forthcoming in his meetings with us. He, any question we asked, he responded very forthcoming and was very responsive. We also performed a lot of testing and a lot of analytical procedures. So we requested a lot of documentation. We looked at a lot of transactions that involved the electrical utility. We did what we call analytical procedures over the general ledger. We did searches for things that we thought would be red flag transactions. And we tested those. We tested to see that they were properly authorized, approved, had proper supporting documentation, and ultimately had a legitimate business purpose. And so we've come back a couple of times in closed session. We had a phase 1 readout with the folks. We had the city council. We had a phase 2, and earlier today we had a phase 3 readout. And so what I'd like to do is just go over some of the findings that we had briefly. Our overall conclusion is that the electric utility was financially mismanaged. And the negative cash balance that it had really was a result of really not keeping the eye on the ball with respect to what was happening with the cash balance. When we met with Mr. Miller, and he was hired back in 2018, there was over $20 million of cash available, in unrestricted cash, at the electric utility. And since that time, it has gone into the negative. And really what has happened is there has been a tremendous amount of activity in the area of capital projects. So there have been a number of substations built, a number of upgrades and expansion of existing services, and those things all cost substantial amounts of money. And there really was no plan as to how that amount was going to be financed. And when you Monday morning quarterback this, you say, wait a minute, they probably should have gone out and got a bond offering to cover that, right? Or the rates that are being charged to the electrical customers probably should have been raised. There should have been money set aside. There should have been a strategic plan in place to handle all of this significant investment, and that just was not the case. Touch briefly on rates. There has not been a rate increase for the residents and commercial payers of Banning since 2013. And really in 2013, it was kind of they swapped some commercial rates and some residential rates. So it's been a long time since there was actual rate increase at the electrical utility. And as over time, the margin has actually continued to decrease and decrease. So the profitability of the electrical utility has continued to decline. Now, I think if you're a ratepayer in the city of Banning, you would say that's not necessarily a bad thing. You want to keep your rates low, right? But when you're talking about fiscal management, and you're talking about funding these large projects, there should have been a rate increase sooner than and now we're saying you're going to have to go out and do a rate study to raise those rates. The electric utilities management has been executing on a multi-year initiative to upgrade existing systems and increase capacity. But there's been no formal strategic plan has been drafted, and there's really been no adequate financing put in place to pay for those improvements. The last capital needs assessment that was done by the electrical utility was done in 2004. It needs to. I know it needs to be done, and it needs to be done soon. The last cost of service study that was done in 2021. It was using 2019 data, and at that time, they didn't actually consider the capital improvement plan that was going on at that time either. The electrical utility's negative cash balance was not readily apparent given the lack of adequate monitoring of its cash position by the utilities management. From 2018 to 2023, the utility spent over $20 million on capital improvements, but they neglected to tell or show how those capital improvements would be paid for. The electric utility has had a negative cash balance since 2022. And this deterioration in financial condition was not properly reported to the City Council in our view. In addition, the budgets for the utility for the years 21 through 2023 indicated that the utility would actually operate at a loss, but there was no plan in place to show how that loss would be covered. Now, I want to say something that's important. Our investigation did not uncover any evidence of fraud or misconduct by any utility personnel, and that includes Mr. Miller. One of the things that came out of the interview is that, in interviews of multiple people within the city, is that Mr. Miller could be very difficult to work with at times. And he himself admitted to us that he has a very short temper and would sometimes lose his temper in negotiations and discussions with city personnel. However, without exception, everyone that we interviewed at the utility characterized Mr. Miller as being an exceptional manager and leader. They also characterized Mr. Miller as being very knowledgeable and very competent in his position as the director of the utility. One of the things that also came out of the investigation is there is sort of an us versus them mentality between city personnel and utility personnel. Folks use terms such as across the tracks. There's been a fair amount of animosity between the staff of the city here and the staff of the utility at the utility offices. We think that's something that should be addressed. So we have a number of recommendations. The first is that the utility should consider available financing, both bridge financing and longer-term financing, such as bonds, to ensure sufficient cash and capital going forward. The utility's budgets forecasted deficits in both operations and capital improvements with no clear indication as to how the deficits would be financed. We recommend that the deficit spending be identified and the departmental leader of the corresponding fund should present a clear and concise plan to City Council when such budgets appear to be negative. There should be a funding plan in place to solve for those budget deficits. The utility has not had a rate increase since 2013, and its operating margins continue to deteriorate. The utility should consider a rate increase for both residential and commercial customers. The last cost of service study was done in 2021 using 2019 data. This excluded capital improvements. The utility should conduct a new cost of service study which incorporates a capital needs assessment to ensure that the costs to complete contemplated capital improvements are also factored into the rate increase. Lastly, the utility should prepare a formal strategic plan, including consideration of financing for any significant capital improvement projects. There's a couple other things I think you may want to consider. The city should identify and the utility should identify opportunities to charge developers for line extensions and developer fees when increasing services for large developments. One other suggestion that was brought up by some of the staff at the utility was there's a lack of clear policies and procedures with regards to purchasing. And there appears to be some ambiguity with respect to how these purchasing policies have been applied historically. The city should consider developing a written formal understanding between the utility and the city finance team to clearly identify roles and responsibilities. We believe that a clear written policy directive is a good recommendation. There's also the relationship with SCAPA. We believe that there should be a formal understanding with respect to how the SCAPA relationship is managed and the vendors that are used through the SCAPA purchasing authority. So we believe that some improvements could be made with respect to the procurement policies as it relates to SCAPA. And then lastly, it appears that the working relationship between the utility and city departments appears strained and somewhat dysfunctional. We recommend that the city council and the city manager take steps to improve the working relationship between the utility and the city. So those are our summary findings from the investigation.
Thank you for the presentation. Appreciated. Council, do we have any clarifying questions only? We can discuss anything else after the public comments, but right now, only clarifying questions, please. We can start off with Councilwoman Wallace.
No.
No? Okay. Mayor Pro Tem? Okay. Councilwoman Flynn.
I have a question on whether you looked at, it was presented to us a while back about removing ourselves from Southern California Edison completely,
Yes.
becoming totally independent. And that was presented in a very poor staff report that did not say it would cost $35 million. And I had asked at the time, where are you going to get that money from? And didn't really have an answer other than maybe floating a bond or something. But I'm wondering if that is still in play, and did you look at that?
Well, I'll give you a quick response. I know Lincoln has probably a more another response, but yes, we did look at that. So that is one of the, when you look strategically as to what the utility wants to accomplish in the future, the fact that power comes through transmission lines from Southern California Edison, they charge a significant amount of money for that transmission. I think the city's plan is to replace that, to essentially take Edison out of that equation. That will allow significant savings. It's going to be a significant upfront cost. But additionally, I believe there may even be some revenue opportunities there. So for instance, you could transmit power to, say, the Morongo tribe and earn some revenue from that project. But that project, as far as I know, is still in its infancy. I have not seen any total cost figures for what that is. I think it's still in the planning stages.
Also, we have recently issued a couple of RFPs. One is a impact fee study that is actually, it was supposed to issue today. I'm not sure if it did, where we're trying to get bids for people to come in and look at our impact fees, including electric impact. So if a developer comes in and they're going to have an amount of capacity that they need, there'd be an impact fee so that they're paying for the capacity that they're expanding. We're also doing an RFP that also was supposed to be released today for a municipal advisor. And so that is the first step towards strategizing on ways to potentially obtain, like Peter said, the bridge financing or some other mean to get through. But that item that was brought to council, I believe he had an estimate of $45 million. And his intention was to do bond financing. So to do that, we need to try and update our capital needs assessment to account for that, do a rate study that incorporates the capital needs assessment needs, assuming that we're going to get bonding for a certain period of time to cover that, and the rate structure that would be necessary to carry it. With that understanding, we'd be saving the amount of money that we currently pay for the energy coming in through the transmission through SCE, and that money could be used towards that new project as well. So there are a lot of moving pieces. It is still on the horizon, but it's nowhere near shovel ready at this point.
So you say 45 million. So I just am trying to recall when this came up to council, and I had asked, well, how long is it to recoup that money? And I think he said 20 years to recoup that. So you have to put out 45 million. After 20 years, you'll break even, and then you may be able to start, selling off energy.
Well, you could sell off energy during that entire period. Basically, a bond is generally going to be a 20 or a 25-year obligation. Mm-hmm. So you're going to be paying into that debt service for quite a while. But, it's similar like when you have a house. You don't have money to buy your house all up front normally. Not all of us, and most of us don't. So you get a mortgage, and you pay it over 30 years. It's similar with the bond financing for this. It's a long-term asset. You want to have a long-term debt solution where you're paying a payment that approximates a lease, but at the end, you own it.
But you're also going to have interest payments on top of that, correct?
Correct.
So it's
like-
going to
like a
balloon up
mortgage.
to maybe 65,000 or
His
something,
estimate
65
was-
million.
His estimate, I believe he said it included the interest.
It included that?
I think the initial was 35 million, and with the interest
35.
was came up to like 45 million,
Okay.
from what I remember. Any more questions?
No.
No? Okay. Councilman Happy, questions?
No, thank you.
Since there are no more questions, thank you for the presentation. We'll move on to accept public comment.
Harry Sullivan. And the only two questions I have is, when they did the audit, did they physically look at the purchases that were made that would have been, you know, pretty high dollar purchases to actually physically see that those purchases were made? Was that part of the audit? And then number two is, did they factor in, because they're looking at more revenue, all the new construction on the west end of Banning? In other words, I believe the one tract that's in development right now has 600 units that they're going to build in there, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. But anyways, there's going to be a huge increase in revenue from those areas out there as soon as they come online. And I just wonder if that was factored into the revenue part of this audit.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Jason Smith, Electric Operations Manager. I'm here tonight to give you my perspective of the investigation that the report was just made. For me, this is my first forensic investigation I've experienced, and to be honest, it wasn't anything I expected. My interview consisted of a very casual conversation for about 20 minutes, in which at that time I was actually surprised at the lack of detailed questions. I was even more surprised by the lack of details in the report that we saw on the public stage. We were not privy to any of the numbers, any of that. So I'm just going off of what the public sees as the draft report that was in the agenda. What I expected were line items, charts, graphs, timelines, et cetera, something to show where we went wrong, something to show that there was something tangible to fix and correct. We didn't see that. Tonight, I just want to comment on a few of the bullet points which we can't see up here because of the technical difficulties. However, to address the failure to raise electric rates, that statement is accurate. However, I feel like it's somewhat incomplete. I feel like there were some documents, such as the Standard & Poor's credit summary rating back that was completed on June 21st of 22, that there was an expectation of a base rate increase of 10 to 13% in the next 3 years, which may offset the recent improvements in rate competitiveness. So I'm going to read verbatim because I brought this up. Bear with me, please. Apologies, I lost my place on here. So I'm curious as to if you guys were given this document as sort of a proof. I can't find exactly what I was saying, but here we go. BU expects to issue debt in the near term to meet anticipated capital needs. As a result, management plans to request from the City Council a base rate increase of around 10 to 13% in the next 2 to 3 years. Mind you, this was done back in 22. BEU has not raised rates since 13. We expect that we will stay relatively competitive despite the proposed increases due to general trend of rising rates throughout the state. And the rate restructure that Mr. Brown referred to, that actually happened in 2018. Not in 2013. I think he probably just misspoke on that. So that part of it is, I'm curious as why that wasn't brought forward on the report as well. And number two, the negative cash position was not readily apparent given the lack of adequate monitoring of its cash. Now, I'm not pointing fingers in any direction here. I'm reading straight from the municipal code. Per Article 21270 of the Banning Municipal Code, the Director of Finance shall be the Chief Accounting Officer for the city under the direction and control of the city manager. He shall be responsible for the efficient administration of all accounting functions for the city. All of the duties, responsibilities, and authority imposed upon the city clerk as Chief Accounting Officer for the city are hereby transferred and imposed upon the Director of Finance. He shall be responsible for the efficient performance of such duties and responsibilities. Namely, he shall, line B, be responsible for all accounting functions of the city, including the electric department and collections from electric customers' accounts. Line E, cause current accounts to be kept of all funds, revenues, receipts, expenditures, and financial commitments of the city. Line F, apply budgetary control of expenditures in order that they will not exceed either anticipated expenditures or actual receipts. Again, I am not pointing fingers. This is not an attack on Lincoln. This is part of my point to this is that there have been several finance directors over the last several years. So somewhat to the creation of policies and procedures that Mr. Brown spoke of, things fall through the cracks when there is high turnover rates. So that's my point with that. And I need to remind you all that the capital improvement projects were approved by City Council between 2018 and 23. Okay, so may I please continue? I'll try to wrap it up as fast as I can.
Is that 3 minutes or? It's 5. It's been 5 minutes. I'm really sorry. It's just that it's a lot of time.
Can I have a closing statement then, because I didn't get a chance to talk about the character? Again, going back to the numbers, I'll make it quick, I promise.
You have 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Okay, so I don't understand the culture issue, how it has to do with forensics or forensic investigations. However, I do feel like it is important. The last one and the most powerful, our investigation didn't identify any evidence of potential occupational fraud, personnel including Tom Miller, creation of bribes, kickbacks, inappropriate vendor-developer relationships, any of that. My humble opinion is that this entire process should have been handled in a completely different manner. As an electric utility employee of over 23 years, I've seen both good and bad times. However, over the course of my employment, I have not met nor been under the leadership of a more dedicated or driven individual than Tom Miller. He does not fit the typical mold of a government employee. Although not perfect, he provided belief in his employees, coupled with opportunity and an environment in which promoted not only departmental but personal growth as well. The intangible value that is lost due to his departure should have at least made it onto this report. As an organization, a city, we can and should do better than this. Tom Miller deserves better than what is on this report. My ask of you tonight is that you amend the report to reflect only the comments with facts and not speculation before you receive and file. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Jim Steffens, Acting Electric Utility Director. Since I am the Acting Director, I thought it appropriate that I say a couple comments. In my previous job, I was not responsible for any kind of capital improvements, so I can't really comment on that part of the equation. However, with my job, I do have a lot to do with the operating margins, because I buy and sell electricity, transmission, congestion revenue rights, renewable energy credits. So what I do affects the margins. So I got to admit, when I saw it went negative in 22, it was kind of a surprise to me, because I really, it's not my job to monitor our margins, but I do kind of see what's going on. So first I thought, well, maybe it's a mistake, but I looked and it's not. We did go negative in 22. It surprised me. It wasn't a lot, it was $250,000. I mean, we'd always been in the black since then. Peter, sorry, I forgot your last name, Mr. Brown, mentioned declining margins. The margins actually just recently started declining, so I kind of didn't want to get feeling that like since 2012 they've been declining. It's mostly been since 2019, or actually 2020 they've been declining. And the reason I'm surprised, like I look at things, I probably looked at not enough things, like the margins and the financials, but like I would look at the debt service covenants, because we have to have 120% coverage of our debt service per the bond documents, and we've always knocked those out of the park. We got, like 19, we were 180%, 21, we were 168%, 22, we were 174%. But, and I realize that we don't count things such as depreciation, non-cash items in there. So I realized that wasn't the best, indicator of margins. But our metered sales, which represents like 90% of our revenue, the last 3 years have gone up. Fiscal year 2020, they're 25.8. 21, they went to 26.3. 22, they went to 27.5. So this is kind of what I'm seeing. I'm seeing like, oh gosh, everything's going up. Our bottom line change in operating position usually was, let's see, where did I have that? Change in net position. Like our highest number was 2.4 million in fiscal year 21. So, it wasn't like this long, steady decline. It was just kind of this thing, and then the last couple of years dropped off. And part of the reason was we lost a lot of our cap and trade money. The CARB took away about half of our allowances, so we didn't get to sell as many of those as possible. So, yeah, I just kind of wanted to put more of paint more of a picture. It wasn't this long declining drop that we should have foreseen. It kind of happened towards the end. And as far as a rate increase, I think the last cost of service study recommended one in 23, and I think that's what Tom was planning to do. But as I look at these numbers here, it's like, wow, we should have done one in 20, maybe 2021. But because our margins did drop from 19, fiscal year 19, they're 8%, which is about average in the industry, but they went to 4% in 20, 3% in 21, and then the minus 1%. So there was a drop-off starting in fiscal year 20. And yeah, I mean, in looking at this, yes, we should have done a rate increase. But that's kind of looking at it in a vacuum. I think COVID was going on at that time, and the city had put on a program, or like told us that, hey, we already have economically disadvantaged customers, and now COVID hit, and we had a state emergency, so we started helping our customers. We stopped all we stopped all disconnects. People couldn't pay their bills because they couldn't go to work because of COVID. So we stopped disconnect. We stopped all fees, all delinquent charges. So we're trying to help them out, and we actually really stopped all cutoffs until just the middle of 2023. So I think I'm just asking to maybe look at this in the bigger picture. You look at the raw numbers, yes, we should have increased rates starting maybe in 2020, but it might have been kind of contradictory because we were told do everything to help our customers get through COVID, get through this emergency, but then we're going to raise rates on them. I mean, maybe we should have. I don't know, but I just think if you don't look at it in a vacuum, there is a little bit of a bigger picture there. What we did do is we did to Tom's credit, when he did the rate changes in 2022, the new tariffs, he put in a power cost adjustment factor because my costs for transmission energy were going up. So he put in a power cost adjustment factor so we could have an adder to the rates. And that was kind of his temporary bridge until he did his rate increase in 2023. Unfortunately, and I honestly don't know why we didn't implement it until June 1st of 2023, the power cost adjustment factor, but we have implemented it now. It's about 1 cent per kilowatt hour. We'd sell about 150 million kilowatt hours, so it works out to about 1.3 million. So, we're not doing a rate increase, but we are recouping some of our lost margins through that. And again, we should have implemented it earlier. I honestly can't say why we didn't implement it earlier. I think it might have been the same reasons, like, do we want to burden our people who coming out of COVID with this? So, I'm not making excuses. These numbers are what they are. Our margins did decline in 2022. We should have done something. COVID probably changed some of our decisions on whether to do those, but anyway, I just wanted to offer that for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Council, my first question, will we be able to get a copy of your report that you gave here this evening, the citizens of Banning?
It's in the agenda.
I asked that that be given to the citizens of Banning because I find exceptions to, it's too cold in here for me.
It is available to the public.
Mr. Burgess, it is attached. It's in the agenda packet.
What?
It's in the agenda packet.
His full report?
Yes.
Well, I missed it, I guess. But anyhow, I was on the ad hoc committee in 2019 on it, and we had $26 million on hand at that time on it. But to sit here and say that my electric department, as a citizen of Banning, had no plans is very upsetting to me because they have planned this for years on it. And right along, as you go along, I'll stutter a little bit here now, but nonetheless, the blame does not belong on Tom Miller on it at all. And I want you to understand that. The $25,000 we sent first, and then another $175, and then another $53,000, $153,000 to get a report like this. I would be embarrassed if I was that company giving such a lousy report on it. The rate increases was in 2021, 22, because I had my electric turned off because I went from $9 to $58 a month on my billboard on it. And then it went back to $9 and it went up. And all the industrial buildings in town has rate increases on it. So to sit here that the last rate increase was 2013, as the gentleman said, it might have been a mistake in their report. I don't know. But believe me, there sits the fault. There sits another fault. Because how anyone could spend that kind of money, supposedly, down, and neither one of them know anything about it. I don't know where you have your heads in the sand or what, because you have to realize these people are. He gave him a $75,000 bonus a while back on it. Did he deserve it? If that's the case, he must have deserved it just like the rest of the employees on it. I realize I'm rattling on, but it upsets me to think that we're sitting here dismissing a gentleman who has done a terrific job. I remember when the fellow was before him here on it, and he did a lousy job on it. But nonetheless, this gentleman has done a good job. His employees are happy with him. And if I were them, I'd vote no confidence of the city manager right away. If I were them, I'll get together and do that. Now, what kind of repercussions they would get from the management, I don't know. But this is not right. And the electric does not need another rate increase on it. In 16, they borrowed money and made went for bid on a 10-year thing, and it cost the citizens abandoning $17,000 of interest in that only owing $16 million at the time on it. Now, you have to dig in your books and look for it. I will get out my ad hoc committee building and see where it went. But you were paying $8,000 to Wells Fargo to collect your utility bills when it was only collecting 20% of the utility bills at that time on it. The other 80% was being paid by the people. That's $8,000 a month. Tonight I spoke of a wheel equipment here of $100 and some thousand, I believe the figure was, and charged to the electric department. Do an audit on what has been charged and what not has been charged to the electric department and draining it by the management in your city. That's what's happening on it. And you can grin better or whatever, but if you don't believe me, go do your homework. There was no reason to spend $25,000. If there was a problem in July, you had a city manager, you had a finance director, you had a purchasing agent. They should have known these figures. You shouldn't have spent $25,000. You shouldn't have spent $75,000 more, and you never should have spent the $53,000 on it. This is unbelievable how this man has been spending and spending and spending and spending, and you people don't have sense enough to wake up and realize what he's doing to our city on it. Please, get your heads out of the sand and manage this city like you would manage your own pocketbook.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of City Council. My name is Brandon Robinson. I am Electrical Engineering Supervisor for City of Banning Electric. I just want to speak a little bit to the capital projects portion of it. So when we made our official and formal 2004 electric master plan, it kind of couldn't have been done at a worse time. So 4 years later, as you guys know, we kind of went into a really big economic recession that, hit major parts of the United States, hit us pretty big as well. And because of that, we had about 20 plus projects that we were going to spend about $45 million in bonds on. So what we had to do was actually reduce the number of those projects. We did that in 2010, brought that to City Council, and we actually told City Council at that time that we would refund some of the bonds to pay down some of the debt. So we ended up doing that in 2015 and further reduced our capital improvement program. So fast forward to now, 2024, and we're actually just now finishing, basically all of the projects that we had left in that capital improvement plan, turned into more of a 20-year plan instead of a 10-year plan because of the aforementioned reasons I've told you. And of course, COVID, which we've all are very familiar with, that kind of delayed things with supply chain and things like that. So just talking to the capital improvement plan, we had one. It just took us a long time to do it, to actually finish it and get everything, completed. And it was always our intent, this year to go out and do another capital needs assessment for another capital improvement plan. Load forecast will come first, and then that's what we're going to do. So just wanted to let you guys know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. Frank Connolly, City Banning. Basically, I agree with most all the speakers tonight. I think if you read your report, as I did, from the guy, let's go to the, I can't get it up on, here we go. It clearly states, GHJ identified numerous violations of this city's purchasing and procurement policy. That's why we're here today, because there was violations. Somebody didn't follow the rules. We have poor accounting standards. Somebody dropped the ball in our accounting. I'm not saying him because he wasn't here. It was probably the girl in Kentucky that used to be with us. It's pretty sad that we just spent $100,000 and this could have been prevented had we been watching our books and somebody was following the procedures. We all know we're a small city, we're gonna have to increase our rates. But don't sit there and continue to purchase and run yourself in debt. The city shouldn't be running debt, period. But to sit there and allow somebody to sit there and numerous violations of our purchasing, where was everybody that somebody wasn't saying, this got to stop, you can't do this, until we waited till we were in the hole on the department. You've got to get better procedures on your purchasing and stuff so this doesn't happen, not only again with this department, but any other department. You need to get somebody in charge that knows how to run the show and quit hiding your heads under the sand when it comes to our accounting. That's why our city is in the position it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no more public comments, we're going to close this portion of the public comments, bring it back to council. And if, Mr. Bogart, if you want to answer some of the questions.
Yes, I'd like to answer quite a few. So the purchasing violations that were in question generally had to do with items that were later brought to council for approval after the fact for contracts that were signed by the electric utility director without authorization by city council, and contracts are, as per purchasing policy, required to be signed by the city manager. So that is one area where the purchasing violations occurred. 2, finance functions. Yes, finance is in charge of the finances. But if it is budgeted and the procurement procedures are followed, there is a contract, a purchase order, a purchase requisition, an invoice, a voucher, we are going to pay it because all of the rules have been followed. We have talked about centralizing purchasing citywide to alleviate things like this from occurring because the decentralized system of purchasing does not appear to be working citywide. Some it is fine and others it is not. Our rating in 2022, our cash was $4 million on our financial statements June 30th. I arrived here on June 23rd. By the month of October, I was talking to Tom about that. He told me I was wrong, that my numbers were wrong. I provided him support as to why the numbers were right. I said, let me know when you would like to discuss it. Nothing. As we moved throughout the year, I started to discuss it more and more as I saw the numbers continued negative. By April of 23, the cash balances of unrestricted actually went negative for the month. At that time, it became critical. I began having conversations with the city manager in earnest, and by the time I was able to quantify the year-end cash position, the proverbial S had hit the fan, and it was time we needed to come to you. People are saying that there was no detail behind this. The information that I presented to council on August 15th is supported by the investigation. There's a whole lot of documentation and details and line items in that council presentation. The reason that the investigators were hired in the first place is because of the pushback that the city provided and saying that we needed an internal evaluation of what was found by the internal staff. That evaluation was done and paid for and supported the conclusions of the meeting that was initially provided. The 2021 rate study did not increase rates overall. There was an adjustment so that some commercial rates were increased and some residential rates were decreased. The overall impact of that rate study was a decline of $300,000 per year in revenues. At that time, in the meeting, when Tom presented to the ad hoc committee and to council, he delineated in a slide that he expected cash to be negative at June 30, 2023. He was right. All in all, the investigators did a good job. And they found what actually happened.
Mr. Bogart, the investigation or the forensic investigation, was at the request of who?
Doug and I and Tom all agreed that it was in the best interest to conduct one, and we brought it to City Council at the special meeting to ask if that would be approved.
So that was at the request of City Council. Correct.
Yes.
When was that done, Lincoln?
The item came August 21st, I believe.
Okay. If council has any more questions or discussions, there is no action requested in this, but council, if you have any more discussion items or questions, please. No? Wallace? Mayor Pro Tem? No? Councilwoman Flynn?
I just want to know, what was presented on the agenda is just a very brief overview, and it's not the final. What we were presented today was very extensive. So once it is finalized, then will the actual report be made public?
Councilmember Flynn, the report that's within the agenda will be the final report. There is no additional public report.
Yeah, there's more detail.
The detail was in closed session.
Yeah, I know, but shouldn't the public know when this is actually finalized what was actually presented in detail? Isn't that their right to see that? What they paid for?
Councilmember Flynn, might I remind you that items discussed in closed session remain in closed session.
Well, I'm not discussing what was
You
discussed.
are discussing a report that was provided to the council in closed session.
Right, and I think that report should be given to the public when it is finalized. It's not finalized yet, but when it's actually finalized, I think that it should be made public and given to the public. And I don't, the public paid for it, and I don't see why there's a problem with giving
Flynn,
that.
items presented in closed session are confidential materials under the Brown Act.
Okay, you're misunderstanding me. Once this is finalized, it should be made completely public and transparent.
A report on tonight's agenda, once it is finalized, will be made available.
Well, I disagree with that. I'm sorry. The public and the taxpayer paid for this, and they should know exactly what happened in detail, not just a generalized overview.
Thank you. Councilman Happy, any questions or
Yes, thank you,
further
Mayor.
discussion?
I guess my question is, obviously, this is, state the obvious, first of all, this is an unfortunate turn of events. And so that brings me to, what do we do about it? So I'm asking city manager, are you going to basically present a review and some actionable items? And when do we get to brainstorm about how to fix some of these holes in the bucket?
A lot of the work is already underway, and when Lincoln presents a budget report here, you'll see pretty significant progress has already been made. We continue to have regular meetings with the management of the electric utility, management of the Administrative Services Department, and myself to discuss issues related to not only the us and them environment that was discussed in the report, but things like, in fact, earlier today we had a meeting talking about how do we reduce the amount of delinquent accounts, which is significant and has pretty much been at the same level for multiple years. We don't have a system that we can actually sort out the aging of the delinquent accounts in a way that is easy to work with. A lot of manual work. It gets back to the whole issue of not having the appropriate software in place to make it easy for people to do their jobs. A lot of manual work is involved. As soon as you start manual work, you open yourself up to a lot of error. We have talked about different ways of bringing the department together in implementing new procedure and policies manual, making it more clear, reducing the inconsistencies between the policy purchasing manual and the municipal code that led to some of the confusion here. And we'll continue to have those meetings to work through some of the recommendations and findings in the report. At a future meeting, we can now that we have the report complete, we can bring back a more detailed plan of action for council discussion and review.
I'd look forward to that, and I also noticed that even in tonight's meeting, there's some them and us and them, and so what would you say about ultimate responsibility as far as the financial numbers go?
Ultimate responsibility is certainly with the city manager, with the city council approving budgets. Now, oftentimes, we're moving toward completion of projects that are multi-year projects that have been approved with previous councils, previous management, electric utility, and city management. One of the electric utility staff brought up the issue of turnover, inconsistency in management, not only of the city but of the electric utility, and those are the types of things that ultimately lead to problems like this. But
is that an unavoidable hazard of being a small utility?
No, I don't believe so. There are things that led to finance directors leaving the city, some voluntarily, some not by their choice. I think we've reached a position now where we have stability, and we can see that moving forward for a number of years.
Well, I think everyone of us are looking forward to an actionable plan that, so we can get past this and make the recovery. And then also, I'm concerned about, finding a new head of the utility and how this episode, would affect someone who would want to take that position. And, I think that our actions will play into that. What is our plan? And so that they can feel comfortable stepping into some hot shoes. So I think we'll all look forward to that.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Lincoln. And thank you, Peter, for the presentation. There's no further questions. We just move on because there's no action requested. I believe it's just a
A
file.
motion to receive and file.
Is this motion to receive and file? Okay, so I'll take a motion to receive and file if anybody has one.
I'll make the motion to receive and file.
Thank you. I have a motion
Second.
and I have a second. Please, roll call.
Flynn,
Yes?
Happy,
Yes.
Menares,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Wallace.
Motion passes 5-0. Again, thank you for the presentation and for being here. We'll